Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Same Old Arsenal podcast. Very, is excited the word? I'm not sure. I'm very interested tonight to be talking to Daniel Childs of the Son of Chelsea podcast. Me and Dan have actually gone back quite a long way. We're not doing as many podcasts together as we have done in previous years, but it was about 10, I think you were saying just before we came on, 10, 11 years ago, where we first started collaborating. Obviously, the YouTube scene has changed so much. It's crazy, really, to think about that. And obviously great to still kind of keep this relationship going. I think the last podcast we did together was when we were speaking about Kai Havertz and his move from Chelsea to Arsenal. Similarly to what we were discussing in this show, a transfer that is, well, to say dividing opinion would be an absolute understatement between the Arsenal fan base. But there's no one better than yourself to be talking about this. Before we go on to talk about Noni Madueke and what he's going to bring to Arsenal, how's things in the world of Chelsea? Because obviously you're involved in the Club World Cup at the minute. You've got the final coming up tomorrow. How do you feel about that tournament? You know, are you a bit exhausted with football? Are you looking forward to having a bit of a break? Because, I mean, it feels like this tournament's going to end and you're straight back into pre-season.
Things in the Chelsea world, I think, are pretty positive at the moment. I think, relative to kind of where we were, funny enough, when we played Arsenal last time around March, that international break period was probably one of the low points. And of course, as with most Chelsea seasons, there are, dramatic ups and downs. But I think, it really started to turn when we got into the Champions League and we won the Conference League as well. That I was out there in Rocklaw, and it was although of course, in terms of like scale of success for Chelsea in Europe, it doesn't come close to some of our other ones, but it really felt quite big for this young group of players to win something together for the first time, and particularly everything that has happened. And it's quite ironic, really, that it's a Club World Cup final tomorrow, because the last time we were in one, that was briefly before the sanctions hit and the takeover to Clear Lake and Bowley. So there's a nice kind of narrative thread there of like feeling like, hopefully Chelsea are moving in a positive direction. And, given where I was very critical of the club's last summer transfer window and just the general tone of that summer, I thought was very, very frantic and negative. I think this one's been a lot different. I think there are criticisms still to be had, but the Club World Cup itself, there's been some real positives. There's been some really good performances, particularly in the knockout stage. I mean, I still am quite intrigued to see how it's viewed in the long term. I don't know if you know him, Louis Benavente. Me and him have a podcast called the Chelsea Echo, and we were talking about this, like not only how this tournament's going to be viewed, but the collateral damage potentially on Chelsea and Man City season heading into, particularly more Chelsea, because obviously we've gone further in the tournament. And it's kind of hard to know. And I wonder if for clubs like Arsenal, for Man United, for Liverpool, and for clubs that kind of may be in the next version of this tournament, if there is another version in 4 years' time, if Chelsea really struggle, if Man City really struggle during the season, people are going to think maybe not the greatest thing to be in the tournament. From a financial point of view, cynically, I think Chelsea's ownership will think they've won the tournament, not in terms of like actually physically winning the trophy itself, but like the money that Chelsea have accrued already and are about to get another wad of cash through the door from North London as well, given, I'm sure, as Arsenal fans may have noticed, the penalty that Chelsea got from UEFA. All round, I think it's a positive time, or at least it's looking upwards for the first time in a couple of years.
And how do you feel about coming up against PSG tomorrow? Because they're a team that we obviously know all too much about, given that we got knocked out by them in the Champions League not too long ago. Fantastic sides. We saw how they dismantled Real Madrid. I think, with all due respect, I'm not saying this to, stick the knife in, but a lot of people are expecting that it's going to be a bit of a one-way game tomorrow and that PSG should win it fairly comfortably. Do you share that sentiment? Like, do you feel like, I mean, obviously as a Chelsea supporter, that's a bit of a silly thing to say, but do you, feel that you genuinely can turn over this PSG side?
PSG are undeniably the favourites. There's no point trying to deny that. And I think if you look at what PSG have done, there's kind of there are echoes of like Pep's Barca team at times when you watch their dominance and the way they're able to suffocate the opposition, keep the ball, the technical players, the positional fluidity of some of their players. Listen, I think, whatever Chelsea do tomorrow, Chelsea could put out their best game and still get beaten by PSG because PSG are just kind of at that peak. And I'm not going to sit here and go, well, get outraged about it. It doesn't mean that everything's at the end of the world. Sometimes you come up against a team who are just better than you, and you just have to kind of hold your hands. I mean, Kvaratskhelia, for instance, is a player who literally within seconds can turn the whole game around with literally, cutting in onto his foot, a right foot, and bending it into the top corner, and what you're supposed to do then. My hope is from a Chelsea perspective is, and not to really take this, Arsenal fans do not want to hear sort of the intricacies of what's going on at Chelsea at the moment from a tactical point of view, but I hope that we walk away from it feeling like, okay, that gap isn't actually that big, especially now we're back in the Champions League. So I'm not fearful, and that doesn't mean I think there isn't a possibility Chelsea get walloped tomorrow. There absolutely is. Look at who they've beaten already. But I don't have fear about. I don't think you should ever have fear about playing good teams. This is where you want to be. You want to be in finals. You want to be in title races. You want to be, challenging for the biggest trophies. So we'll see how Chelsea turn up, and maybe in the underdog situation, which Chelsea have been in before, they can surprise a few people.
Yeah, and it's a good test, isn't it? Because you've got the Champions League coming up, and I suppose you haven't really played a team of PSG's caliber in a while. Because I know the sides you faced coming up to the final, they've been, I suppose, teams that you would expect to beat, right? Whereas PSG, they've played the likes of Real Madrid, Bayern Munich. They've had a much tougher route, so it should be an interesting game. And I would say I'm wishing you all the best, but I'm just looking forward to hopefully seeing a good game of football. We'll see what way the result swings. Before, as I say, we do dive into the nuts and bolts of what the essence of this podcast is about. Chelsea have obviously had a very busy summer already. You brought in Gittins, Liam Delap. You've got a few outgoings as well. We saw your goalkeepers moving on to Bournemouth as well. Seems to have got a very good fee for him. How are you feeling about Chelsea's transfer business? And one question that I think a lot of, well, at least from the Arsenal point of view, in my sense, that I'm interested in is what on earth is going on with Raheem Sterling at this point?
On Sterling, I'm not any more wiser than probably Arsenal fans about his situation. I mean, he's pretty much an outcast, and he's not going to be taking any part, I think, in pre-season. I think it's one of those, cases we've seen at Chelsea and other clubs where hopefully an arrangement will be made. I mean, I know that for actually quite a while, there's been interest from Saudi, or at least talk of an interest from Saudi. And I feel like the Sterling one is potentially one that rumbles on all the way to the end of the transfer window. And then maybe he gets a loan, for instance. Like if you remember like the Lukaku situation, they kind of had to financially deal with loaning him out to Inter Milan, Kepa Arrizabalaga, that type of situation where financially, because of his wages, is anyone in Europe going to be able to take that, on a permanent deal? We saw the Arsenal situation last year, but given how it turned out, there's no kind of route for him to go back to Arsenal. So I'm not entirely sure. I think generally the business I've been pretty happy about, with one massive caveat, which is the goalkeeping situation. As you said, I have no idea why we've decided to part ways with Georgia Petrovic without giving him a decent shot. And my hope is we go back in for Mike Maignan. I do think, as this ties into Noni Madueke and how it's going to look for Chelsea for the rest of the window, I think there's an intrigue of how Chelsea acts once Noni is out the door. Do they still have the intention to go out and sign another attacking player, some of whom Arsenal fans are interested in? Or are we going to invest that money elsewhere in the squad? And I think there's an interesting conversation between Chelsea fans about that. I mean, I do think that goalkeeper and cover, say, at left back for us is more pressing in just terms of like bodies within the squad to another attacking player. But listen, as a Chelsea fan, I can never, especially under this ownership, I can never sort of sit here and confidently tell you our business is done and they won't spring a surprise on us.
Yeah, and that leads into a question we've got here from Phil Macker. I mean, we've all seen the graphics on Twitter of the various players you've got, about 6 in each position of the pitch. Would you say that Chelsea are moving towards now a more settled squad, or like Phil says, is it still a bit chaotic?
No, things I think are settling down. I think from an outside perspective, you have a lot of our Chelsea, here we go, signing another player. And I understand some of it. There is collateral damage to Chelsea's transfer policy. I mean, a very young central midfielder, Amagu, has just gone permanently to, I guess you'd call it our multi-club, our sister club, Strasbourg permanently. And we only signed him in January. But because of the international loan spots, he's had to be sold on permanently rather than going on loan somewhere else. I think the idea was always him to go on loan for Strasbourg. But I think that when I look at the squad and I look at the business we've done this summer, I think there is a footballing logic behind it. There's no footballing logic last summer to signing Joao Felix. I mean, I don't really know if there is any footballing logic now to sign Joao Felix, but it was deals like that last summer that made no sense. It was like loaning out Georgia Petrovic, who'd had a really good end to the season under Pochettino, instead to make Rob Sanchez your first choice. That's a flawed idea. There were many other things that we did last summer that I didn't agree with, and it did look chaotic, and I don't think set us up in the best way possible. I think Jamie Gittins fits into what Maresca wants to do in terms of a profile of left winger. Joao Pedro, I think, is a very interesting talent, someone who I like, and I think that he's already been used as a centre forward. Again, can be fluid, can play in multiple positions. Liam Delap, other than Nicholas Jackson, this is a thing. Chelsea have signed a lot of players, but they still had massive oversights in certain key positions. So you had a situation where Nicholas Jackson was basically the only real first choice striker, or at least experienced that even at his young age that could play on a regular basis. Now there's actual depth there. Liam Delap for 30 million for the goal tally he had for a team that got relegated, I don't think is a bad piece of business. And with Andre Santos, a very exciting midfielder returning from Strasbourg, Esteval Willian, who scored against Chelsea, and there's a lot of high hopes about. I don't think it's a case of looking at this squad and going, oh, it's chaotic. There's no planning in terms of like profile or like footballing logic behind it. I understand people outside, fair enough, are going to have that view. But from my perspective, covering the club on a daily basis, I am a lot more positive about it now than I was 12 months ago.
Yeah, last summer it did seem like you were kind of, shopping in the pick and mix section of the supermarket and just putting everything into a little cup of sweets so you could fill to the absolute brim. I mean, Joao Felix at the time, I remember looking at that from an outside perspective, just thinking, why? Why? They've got so many attackers, they just don't need him. And I think that kind of leans into not a similar situation that we're experiencing at Arsenal at the minute, but I do think there is a sense that I certainly feel on social media, which I know isn't always a good reflection of reality, but it does feel like there's a lot of Arsenal fans that just want us to sign everyone. And the expectation is that we will sign everyone. We're going to sign Gyökeres, we're going to sign Rodrigo, we're going to sign Eze, we're going to sign Mosquera, we're going to sign all these guys on top of the business that we've already done in terms of Kepa, Norgard, Zubimendi. And I think you've got to have a little bit of perspective and think, are Arsenal really going to spend upwards of 300, potentially 350 million to comply with UEFA and PSR? Probably not, unless there's some very, very intricate and magical deals that have gone on behind the scenes, which I'm hoping we've kind of done with Noni Madueke, which kind of is a nice segue into the beef of the podcast, if you like. This one has really come out of nowhere, Dan. I'm not sure if you were expecting him to leave this summer, but I certainly wasn't expecting us to go in for him. And in terms of the list of priorities that we've got at Arsenal, I think one of the real frustrations that fans are feeling with regards to this is that it doesn't feel like a priority. A lot of people are looking at Madueke as the backup to Bukayo Saka, and I think we can debate around whether he's going to, come on for Saka in games, maybe start games that we want to give Saka a break in, whether he's going to start on the left in some instances and, plays ahead of Martinelli, for example. That's all up for debate, and I think that's causing a bit of confusion as to how we're actually going to use the player. But when we've still got business that needs to be done in terms of striker, Eberechi Eze, which I think a lot of fans have got their heart set on now, and still, there's a lot of clamour for Rodrigo. And as I say, I think some fans are expecting us to still go beyond this, beyond Madueke, and sign Eze, Gyökeres, Rodrigo, which I just don't see happening without a massive sale. Even with that, I think it's going to be a big struggle. But that's why there's such uproar, amongst the fan base, because even to me, it doesn't feel like a priority signing, and I can't really get my head around it. It's one of those ones where I'm open to it, but I'm not infused by it, if you know what I mean. And when I look at the transfer fee, and we're spending what feels like a significant portion of our budget on this, and it's happened so quickly as well. Like it's not like, this has gone on for weeks and we've been negotiating a fee. It's like, okay, that suits us, that suits you, the job's done. What are your just general thoughts and feelings towards this one?
There are several. I mean, I've got to say, and people can, this is not me saying it now that he's gone, that I'm sort of changing and softening my opinion. I've always been a fan of Noni Madueke. I think he's was last season Chelsea's strongest performing winger. The numbers just show that if you compare his numbers in the Premier League to Pedro Neto, to Jadon Sancho, comparing his numbers to players who played a similar amount of minutes, and I felt that he really came on last season. I think he added a bit more flexibility to his game, not only positionally, but just in the way he executes on the pitch. I think there was an accusation when he first joined Chelsea that he was a bit predictable. You knew he wanted to get the ball onto his favoured left foot to either take a shot or cross the ball. There's a lot more last season of him wanting to, and feeling comfortable and confident to take the defender down the line. And then later on in the season, very late on, I can't exactly remember why. I think it might have been an injury or suspension or something. He was shifted to the left by Maresca. And I think it was against Everton at home. And he had a really promising performance, surprisingly promising. And then we did it again against Liverpool where we beat them. And he had another really good performance. And there was a sense that, oh, he's adding another skill here. There's Noni at left wing. It could actually be something that works and we really develop. And I was kind of thinking at the end of the season, keep Noni Madueke. Let's see how he develops. Yeah, there's new players coming in, but I think he could still develop. And with that ability to play off the left, maybe he'll get more minutes. But during the Club World Cup, I mean, he hasn't been a starter pretty much from the off. Pedro Neto was the starting player in front of him on the right side of Chelsea's attack. And I think it's a risk. I think I sit here right now. The best thing I could say to Arsenal fans, and whether they take this opinion seriously or not, I am a lot less comfortable letting Madueke go to Arsenal than I was about Kai Havertz going to Arsenal. And 2 years, whenever he signed for Arsenal, 2 years later, you will not find a Chelsea fan. I mean, you can try very hard, and maybe you will find some Chelsea fan on some discreet location who tells you this. But there is not a Chelsea fan who regrets Kai Havertz walking out the door at Chelsea. We have not missed him one bit. That within months, Cole Palmer came in and became an infinitely better player overall than Havertz was for Chelsea. So there was no kind of regret there. And I felt at the time that it could be a good move for both clubs. I think Havertz had all of his chances at Chelsea. It was right for him to move on. I sort of saw no path forward. And for Arsenal, it felt like after the season, they just had, okay, you move on to that location and maybe it works out for you there. Madueke is a little bit different because I think there is an actual potential there. I think there is a sense of progression. I find it weird on the player side that he chooses Arsenal. I understand it maybe from a location point of view, staying in London. We see this pretty consistently. Why so much business happens between Chelsea and Arsenal and other London clubs is because of the location. That's kind of maybe a feeling. And also because Arsenal were in the Champions League semi-final last year, are probably competing for a Premier League title or aiming to compete for a title. But from like a minute's progression from where he is at Chelsea, I don't really get it. Because as you've already mentioned, if he's seeing himself as a right winger, you're understudy to Bukayo Saka every single week that Bukayo Saka is fit and raring to go. And I mean, maybe you can tell me this better, but it seems to me that Saka, whenever he's fit, is playing or playing most of the important games for Arsenal. And that's understandable why. So I don't really understand if Madueke is accepting himself as a potential understudy, why he couldn't have done that at Chelsea. But then also, I think he would have had a better chance of minutes at Chelsea. So I think there's a bit of weirdness there. I think the fee is maybe not to the height I would have wanted, but listen, in the current market, I think it's a good fee for the player. So until I see the next 6 to 12 months from a Chelsea perspective of how his goals either don't affect us negatively, like leaving, or it does, I can't really say right now. But I think that at the very least there is a risk that he goes on to Arsenal and does bigger and better things. But obviously, it's not a simple case of him walking into the door and becoming first choice, because that, unless Arteta changes his system, unless Madueke completely commits to being a left winger, I don't see that happening.
I mean, even if he does go onto that left-hand side, I wouldn't be in a rush to put him ahead of the options that we've already got. I mean, we've already got Martinelli. Trossard is in talks of signing a new deal. And as I say, we could be potentially looking at signing one, or if you're extremely optimistic, both of Eze and Rodrigo. So there's options there. And I think what we've missed at Arsenal, especially last season, is just that versatility of options. There was a period right at the start of this year when we were going into games and our front three was Nwaneri, Marino and Sterling. And that's just not a good enough front three in any way, shape or form. I mean, that's a bottom 10 of the Premier League front three. It's just not good enough. So I think what we're looking at in Madueke is someone that's a very different option to what we've already got. We've got someone that's potentially going to run at players. He's a lot more direct, because as much as I love Bukayo Saka, he's not a winger in the sense of he's going to run down the byline and just beat 4, 5, 6 men. He likes to stand his man up, almost slow the game down a little bit to his pace, and he's extremely good at that. And that's what makes him such a unique and world-class player. But at times when we do want to play on the transition and when we do want to move the ball ahead of a lot more quickly, having someone like Madueke, I don't know. I mean, you'll know better than me as to what skill sets he can bring to Arsenal. But that kind of leads me into my next question. Why do you think, out of all the players that are available right now, Arsenal have looked at him and thought, okay, that's our guy?
I think because he does have a bit of, like, I refer to players like this as kind of a maverick sort of spirit, in the sense that, you watch a lot of wide players nowadays and they are more than content to get to the byline, and if obvious opportunity to cross the ball in or maybe take a shot isn't on, they cut back, play a safe pass, recycle possession, and kind of keep things ticking over in a very systematic and robotic way. I think what Noni does, and what I've always liked about him as a winger, is he does take chances, sometimes to his detriment. Like the scale, if you're an Arsenal fan and you're maybe negative about Madueke and you've been watching him, his scale and pendulum of performance is a lot more drastic to, say, Pedro Neto in a Chelsea context, where he will sometimes look pretty horrendous for periods because he may try audacious things that don't work out. He'll try a first-time pass over the top of the defense. He'll take a wild shot. He will try a cross that maybe isn't always on. He'll do something individually where maybe he loses the ball. But I personally like those players more. And I think Noni, throughout his time at Chelsea, showed that he was getting better at it, more consistent at it, and an ability to, as I said earlier, keep the defender guessing. Where, yeah, I absolutely do want to get this ball onto my left foot because it's my favourite foot. But if you watched, I would suggest go and watch him against Everton, go and watch him against Liverpool, where at times he was getting that ball onto his right foot and he wasn't scared to take a shot there. I mean, we see this with a lot of players, right? That they are so fearful to shoot with their less favoured foot, and chances go missing, So I think that's what I like about him. There is a sense that at times he is going to, not that he can't work within a system, and not that he isn't I think he is a good worker off the ball as well. I think he can be an effective presser. And as you say, in transition, I think there is obviously a lot of speed there that can really hurt teams. But I also just think there's an unpredictability to him. And I mean, maybe Arteta, a bit like Maresca at times last season, can be accused of being a little bit predictable, a little bit slow, a little bit kind of, it's one of those things where, if you're Arsenal and you're 60, 65 minutes and a game isn't going in your favour, it's like 0-0 at home against a low block, and you're thinking to yourself, like last season, Arteta looks to his bench, and because of injuries or just because of the squad building, I don't have an alternative option here. Madueke against a low block, for instance, I think I saw an Arsenal analyst account, point this out. His performance against Ipswich at home, which was a bad day for Chelsea, but if you actually look at some of the crosses he put into the box against a very deep sitting defence, I would actually recommend people watch a game at home to Brentford, who have always notoriously been a tough team for Chelsea to play. And we were really struggling to break them down just before Christmas. And he cuts the ball onto his left foot and he bends this brilliant cross with his left foot into the box, and Cucurella's there to head it in. And it was, a bit of inspiration, a bit of ingenuity, a quality on the ball that maybe other players aren't going to play. As I say, like a Pedro Neto could produce that cross, but sometimes maybe in that kind of situation is more prone to kind of just, maybe not attempting that. So I wonder if it's that, and also just, he's playing for England now. Thomas Tuchel clearly rates him. There's a sense that, yeah, if you look at his numbers, he improved those numbers last year. I mean, I think in the end it was 8 Premier League goals, 11 in all competitions. And although they were spread out pretty consistently, like it wasn't a case where he was consistently, he was his goal, because he scored, I think he scored quite a few at the start of last season, particularly a hat trick at Wolves, which kind of inflated his numbers. And there was a nice sort of joke, sort of narrative with Wolves fans during that game. He can be a good scorer of goals as well. I think at times he will find himself inside the box, has an ability to take opportunities, particularly on that left foot. So I wonder if that's it. They are looking at a talent and going, is he one of these players that's about to go to another level? And maybe that was the equation they were making when they signed Kai Havertz as well. And that.
Sorry, mate. I think it's different to Kai Havertz though, because with Havertz, I think there was a very clear route for him to get into the team. You know, we'd just lost Granit Xhaka. Gabriel Jesus was struggling with injuries. I mean, I know a lot of people said that when we signed Kai Havertz, he was coming in as that left number 8. And okay, maybe that was the case and the plan for him all along. But I remember his first game that he started for us was as striker in the Community Shield. So maybe all along the club were viewing him as someone that was going to be the striker or a bit more of an auxiliary man, someone that can play left 8, someone that can play up top. But either way, he's a guy that last season, despite being out for a third of the campaign due to injury, he still ended up as our top scorer. Has been a really pivotal part of this team since his signing. Has been, I think, really, really good apart from his first 3 months. And with Madueke, it's not really quite the same because, as I say, you've got Saka in front of him, you've got Martinelli, and you've still got Trossard on the left. We're potentially looking at signing another guy. So I just don't see how he's going to get a lot of minutes. I can see him finishing games and ending games, but I think I struggle to see him getting loads and loads of goals and assists. I don't see that happening unless he's going to regularly start games. Now, it's not going to happen on the right. You can almost guarantee that's not going to happen on the right, barring, God forbid, another injury to Bukayo Saka. So you've seen him play on the left, albeit sparingly for Chelsea. Is he a completely different player there, or can he do a job on that side?
I think you can do a job on that side. I said you've got to factor in it's a really, really small sample size. I mean, really, really small. I mean, it's a handful of games, and that run of him starting on the left for Chelsea, unless my mind forgets a game in his first season, really. It started around early April time. And then it wasn't even that he played in that role for the rest of the season. Like he did, I think if I remember rightly, he started the Conference League final, I believe, off the right against Real Betis. So as I said, it's a difficult one to kind of guarantee you that on the left that's absolutely going to be his position where he can thrive. All I can say is based on what I watched was, as I said, was a short sample size, but I think it was encouraging given it's not really a role he played before. And I think, a player could have been found out in that position. I never sort of looked at him at left wing and thought, wow, he looks like really out of place here. At times it felt like he was actually more impactful than Jadon Sancho, who got tons and tons of minutes on that side from Maresca. So for Madueke, if I was like giving him advice, you stay at Chelsea in one scenario, but I know now they've signed Anthony Elanga, but earlier in the window, there was chat of say Newcastle coming in for him, and I think that would have been a more realistic route for him, like to get first team minutes kind of instantly, because you got Anthony Gordon and kind of nailed down the left side, and now they've got Elanga. But I think Madueke is as good, if not a bit better than Elanga. So I agree with you. I think Havertz, in terms of you could plot a path for him to walk into that starting 11. You can't currently with Noni Madueke, and that is something that from an Arsenal perspective, I don't really understand. Like if he's just going to be a backup, especially if you're kind of looking at your level in the Premier League, level in the Champions League, and saying it's not atrocious. So there's clearly got to be other areas you invest. I mean, if this somehow leads to you not signing, say, a first choice left winger, I still kind of think that the Gyökeres deal will get done. I mean, that's not based on any sort of insider knowledge. It feels like you will sign at least one of the centre forwards you've been linked to. From the player side, it's weird, and I think I understand Arsenal fans' frustrations. I do. I understand. Although I like the player, I can understand why, from your own squad building point of view, just from an outside looking in, I'd sort of, it's a question I have sometimes about Chelsea's transfer policy. Like, why are we spending 50, 60 million on guys who might not actually raise our level that significantly, when the money you could spend on someone who potentially walks into your starting 11 and does that? It's not a guarantee, but does that, there's always going to be that argument, right? That, well, we signed a backup here for money that could have been spent elsewhere. So I'm not going to disagree with you. I'm not going to disagree with you that, as I said, I from the player point of view, Saka is one of the Premier League's best players. On his day, he's an astonishing talent. And if Madueke is content to be that understudy, I guess that's the path he's chosen.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly going to be an interesting one. I mean, the volatility around this transfer has just been I've never known anything like it. I know there was a lot of debate when we signed Kai Havertz, as I mentioned at the start of the podcast. But I mean, you've seen the graffiti at the Emirates, and look, we don't know if that was Arsenal fans. I think it's an easy assumption to make, but it could be, point scoring from Spurs fans, whoever. You never know, so you don't want to immediately assume that this could be Arsenal fans, but it doesn't look good, and it wouldn't be a surprise given what we've seen on social media, and like people, are saying in the chat room, that it's just been, quite frankly, disgraceful behaviour. And to be honest, I never found myself agreeing with Rio Ferdinand, but he put out a really good post on X earlier, just saying, everyone should be behind this guy. I just think how this reflects on his family and friends that are probably all supporting him and celebrating a big money move to a club that he might want to play for, or well, obviously does want to play for. And then you go on social media and you just see so many Arsenal fans just up in arms about a transfer, and going to the point of deciding to back to not back the manager based on this. So it's yeah, just divisive is not the word. But can you give any positivity to Arsenal fans that are maybe so upset about this transfer, that are just up in arms about it, like I say? And I think a big part of it is that there's a big assumption that this is the left winger signing. We've spoken about the players that we are linked to already, but I think a lot of Arsenal fans are jumping the gun a little bit and thinking, okay, this is the winger signing because it's costing such a large fee. We're not going to go on and do any more business. Is there anything from a Chelsea perspective that you can say to kind of make Arsenal fans feel a little bit more at ease with bringing this player in, and just kind of giving us a bit of comfort, Dan, that he might well be a success and is ultimately worth the fee that we're paying for him?
I think in the current market, that is a fee that I think is worthy for the talent of Noni Madueke, because you have to compare it with how players. It's not so much about how you personally rate this player. It's like a club like Chelsea, like Arsenal, if they were selling a player in this market, are going to look at the money Jamie Gittins has gone for. They're going to look at the money that Anthony Elanga has just gone for. The price is being quoted for Alejandro Garnacho. So Chelsea are going to think to themselves, like, it was the case of when I was talking about Havertz leaving Chelsea. And I remember at the time, people were like, 65 million, you're insane for wanting that money. And the argument I made back was, well, Chelsea want to be well compensated for effectively letting. So it's not like some of the players that have gone from Chelsea to Arsenal in the closing stages of their career, like a Petr Cech. Was that a direct transfer, or was that, I can't remember if that was the end of the contract?
That was I think we paid about 10 odd million for him at the time.
So yeah, so like there is a player that's already had their legacy at Chelsea. We have another player in that position. At the time, it was Courtois. There's not a sense that we're going to lose years and years of his prime development somewhere else to a rival. So you want to be well compensated for that, right? And I think that's kind of the theory behind these fees as much as anything. And listen, I think that, like, where I would like Chelsea to be aiming this year, I mean, looking at the final Premier League table, I think Chelsea ended only 5 points behind Arsenal in the Premier League table, which, given how I think the assessment of both clubs has been, sometimes very harshly from myself towards Chelsea, I sort of look at that. I mean, 5 points is not an insurmountable tally to overcome. Of course, I'm not factoring, you can't guarantee that points tally is going to be the same in 12 months, but I think Chelsea should be aiming to overcome Arsenal and to be competing with them, and then trying to compete for a Premier League title. And in a era of the Premier League where it's no longer just a top four, it's a top six, arguably top seven, competing for 4 or 5 spots, those fine margins can be defining. And although Noni Madueke might not be a starter for Arsenal, in a period of the season, like you explained earlier, when Saka went down injured and you were like really, really struggling for options off the bench, what if Noni comes off the bench and provides those 2 or 3 goals that gets those points that you didn't have before, and offers you a rotation option that you didn't have? Like, my fear is Noni goes to another level. The comfort I have from a Chelsea point of view is I'm very confident of the players we have either coming in, the players we already have, that overall as kind of an attacking package, maybe not specifically from the right wing, the goals will be made up elsewhere. So Jamie Gittins, Joao Pedro, Liam Delap, Nicholas Jackson if he stays around, Cole Palmer, Enzo Fernandez. there will be goals elsewhere that make whatever Madueke does at Arsenal a bit of an irrelevancy. That's my positive kind of hypothetical. And when I'd encourage people if they want, because I have a Substack, and I made an article kind of a for and against selling Noni Madueke. And I deep dive some of the numbers. And to be fair, from an Arsenal point of view, it's probably not the best, because I kind of make a counter argument that if you look at his number comparisons from his first full season under Pochettino to last season, it's actually not a vast improvement. You always have to factor in how coaches are asking players to play in their system, to be fair. But there are reasons in that piece as I've stated here, that you can see why I don't agree with Chelsea fans' analysis that he's a rubbish player. Either that's kind of projection, that's kind of like saving face. I don't think he's a terrible player, because then that really damages the rest of our attacking outlet, especially the wide players last season. Because if he's rubbish, then what about, Pedro Neto, who didn't really have a great season, Jadon Sancho, who's obviously not at the club anymore. And I am biased towards him. I think he is a very talented winger. And I think given the right platform at Chelsea or somewhere else, I could see him going on to another level and being a far more effective and consistent player. There has always been question marks over his application or attitude off the pitch. And this is not like the stereotypes that I know are lazy sometimes towards players. It's there was an incident in, I think it was a Boxing Day game, where Maresca didn't have him in the squad, and that kind of hurt him in options of the game. But I think he'd maybe turned up late for training or something. And maybe there is more than meets the eye with this transfer from a Chelsea. I still think if Madueke, it seems to be a player thing. I think he clearly wanted the move to happen. I don't think it's a case of Chelsea turning around to Noni Madueke and saying, you're no longer part of our plans, very bluntly. I would have been intrigued to see the hypothetical if the player wasn't pushing for a move, whether Chelsea would have been as willing if Arsenal approached. We'll never know that, right? But I think that's, if you're an Arsenal fan, he clearly wanted to make that move. And you hope, as any fan, when a player arrives at your club, we all want players to do, like, it's that nuance, right, of you sitting here as an Arsenal fan saying, I'm not so sure of this transfer, but I know you as an Arsenal fan, just as me as a Chelsea fan, when a player arrives at our club, when they get on the pitch, you want them to do amazingly well. Like, I still have no idea why we signed Kiernan Dewsbury-Hall, but anytime Kiernan Dewsbury-Hall gets on the pitch, I want him to be the best version of Kiernan Dewsbury-Hall there has ever been.
Yeah, it was the same for me with Sterling. Yeah,
it's like,
I was so frustrated. I was like, I really hope he scores in this game.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of the nonsense of social media, right? This kind of warps logic that happens on social media, where if I'm cynical, I'm negative about Chelsea, I always hope I'm proven wrong. I don't care about being right in the long term. My fear and cynicism about Maresca as a coach, about where the team was going in like March and April, was proven wrong by the end of the season. And I was dancing the night away in Rocklaw when we were lifting that trophy. It's the same, I think, for any fans, right? And all I can say is someone who's watched Madueke, and I think I like to think I'm fair about players. I don't BS. If I think a player has done really well, I'm going to say they do really well. If I think they've been pretty crap, I'm going to say they've been pretty crap or been pretty underwhelming. And that's the truth of it. There is some fear, there is some trepidation that we've let, I think, a very talented wide player go to a direct rival, in my opinion. And the risk you have, my hope from a Chelsea point of view, is we act quickly, or we've already acted, to make sure him going, and Madueke could go to Arsenal and be very successful, but in the end, it doesn't really matter from a Chelsea point of view, because we have other players being successful. So I'm not an Arsenal fan, so I can't. There's nothing I'm going to say here that's going to make you go, because I can't turn around and go, he's Lionel Messi. I can't. I'm not going to lie to you and say he's like this astonishing player, because I do think he is flawed. I think he has inconsistencies. I think he is raw. He is erratic at times. He goes through stretches of the season where he isn't producing. But maybe I'm proven wrong, and he turns up at Arsenal and he goes to another level.
Yeah, I think from your point of view, I mean, I know so many fans of any club are skeptical of the way you've gone about your business and the way you recruit and you buy so many players. But I suppose this is one advantage that you've got, is that where you buy in such volume and you buy so young, if you do find a situation where you're quite able to quickly turn a profit on a player like Madueke, where you're making like 20, 25 million on him, quite, it's 2.5 years or something like that. So I mean, it's quite a quick turnover in football. because you've got all these other players, you know, there's no guarantee that the player you're selling is going to go on and do wonderful things. Like, but even if they do, you've probably got someone out of that massive pool of players that is going to fill in to that void. I mean, like you said, you saw it with Cole Palmer when Havertz left. It's funny how these things work out, but I think that's, you know, not to go off on too much of a Chelsea tangent, but where you have got those options available to you and where your squad is kind of in a constant state of flux almost, where you've got players going in and going out.
Just sorry to interrupt, but I think
Okay.
it's one of those. It's a different thing about this Chelsea era than previous Chelsea eras of actually being open to doing direct business with rivals and letting players move on to rivals and understanding that that's not like a killer blow. That isn't, you know, the end of the world. And I think that, yeah, I think my worry would have been if we'd let Madueke go and there wasn't an Esteval, there wasn't a Jamie Gittins.
I think, sorry, Dan, that seems to be though, because you don't have like, I mean, look, when we started doing this a long time ago, Chelsea were such a different beast to what they are now.
Yeah.
You know, I don't look at Chelsea and think, apart from Cole Palmer, that anyone in that side is untouchable. You know, I could look at your 11.
I think, yeah, I mean, I tend to disagree, but I think Moises Caicedo has been
of course
insane for Chelsea. Enzo Fernandez, I think, has gone up another level. I think probably internally, although maybe he sees himself in the white of Real Madrid at some point in his career, which a lot of players do. I think he's kind of there. I agree with you that, yeah, listen, it's not, when we started doing these conversations, you had Eden Hazard, you had Diego Costa, you know, you had even Willian, who I think is at times is
Terry,
not from
Lampard,
an Arsenal perspective.
Fabregas.
Yeah. You had players who were, this is not the Chelsea side of 2004-5 or 2014-15. But I think that there is clearly internally at the club, maybe just and maybe born out of what happened with not only Havertz but Mason Mount as well, that at the time those deals were unpopular or seen as quite risky. And if you look back on both of those examples, I really don't, as I say, purely from a Chelsea point of view, there's kind of no regrets there. You got good money for both of those players, and arguably you replaced them with similar level or better ones. And you know, it's always more painful if Mount went to Man United and didn't have, you know, went on to achieve great things.
That's worked out well for you.
Yeah, it has. And then he, you know, for whatever, you know, he's had lots and lots of injury problems. And as I said, you know, in the case of Havertz, there's no, because it was very quick. It was a very quick turnaround. Palmer arrives, he's incredible, and everyone just kind of goes, well, that's the guy now. And you kind of just turn around quickly. So that's what football is. And I think that Madueke can be a success at Arsenal, but it also doesn't have to be a disaster for Chelsea, which I know in our social media binary age is not what people want to hear. They want the black and white of kind of, it's, you know, it's banter, kind of negative or positive for one club or the other. I think Havertz is a prime example that just isn't the case. You know, deals can work out well for both clubs.
And just before I let you go, mate, because I'm just conscious of the time, but one thing that you touched on earlier, which I think a lot of Arsenal fans are going to be very interested in, are the disciplinary issues that you mentioned. He does strike me as a player that comes with a bit of an ego. You know, we've all seen the clip of him having the mini tussle with Cole Palmer over the penalty. You know, we've seen the Instagram post that he put out when he went to Wolves. There's some dubious moments in there, and given that Arteta is a guy that is so hot on discipline, like we know what he's done with players like Aubameyang in the past. I mean, from an Arsenal point of view, is that something we should genuinely be concerned about?
Maybe. Trying to put this in a kind of respectful way. I mean, I think that but I sometimes wonder, you know, is that sometimes perception rather than reality? You know, I think that you know, you sometimes look at players of his ilk, or kind of players at that end of the pitch, have to be very confident at times. And I think maybe the perception of his character maybe is a little bit unfair at times, because he's trying flair things. He wants to be a confident player. He wants to be a technical player. He wants to try audacious things, and maybe that comes with an unfair reputation. But absolutely, there were times at Chelsea when that was the case. You can find quotes of Pochettino in Madueke's first season when he was hot on kind of in press conferences going after Madueke and saying, your levels need to be better. You need to be more consistent. You need to earn your place in his first team. You can't slack off. You know, you are not going to be playing for me if that isn't the case. I think there is that perception, unfair or not, or just like based on certain evidence, you could at least say he hasn't been kind of this 7 out of 10 every single week. You are guaranteed a certain level of Madueke performance no matter what happens. Unfortunately, Madueke, I think at times hasn't really overcome his surroundings, kind of, or like there are certain players like a Caicedo. I know we're talking about a very different profile player, and their job is very different in the team. But Caicedo, through even the worst times of last season, and I'm sure you will have Arsenal players like this, that I know there's going to be a level of performance from Moises Caicedo, and he's still up there whilst his teammates may be down there. Madueke is not one of those players for me. I still don't think he's mature enough at his age to kind of rise above. And if his team's having a bad day, drag them out of a ditch. Again, I think with his talent, you could see him becoming that player, but I don't think that maturity is there at the moment. And that may lead to butting of heads with Arteta, as you say, off the pitch.
Okay, well, it's certainly going to be one that will be interesting. From my point of view, like I said, I'm open to this. I'm intrigued by it. I'm not particularly excited by the fee. But, when he pulls on that red and white jersey, I'm going to be fully behind him. Dan, before I let you go, just one last question here from Phil Macker again. He doesn't see Chelsea as title contenders next season, but what's your take on it?
I think that the ambition for Chelsea should be not like title contenders in a sense where they're like all the way, but I think there has to be. I personally feel like if Chelsea are where they were at the end of last season in 12 months' time, I don't really think a progression has been made. I think the ambition should be to be over 70 points, getting 75, even trying to get to 80 and seeing where the rest of the league is. Because I think last year was a bit weird because we didn't really have any title race. I mean, it was quite clear in about January that Liverpool walking away with the title very easily with their slippers on. And so I predict that that's not going to be the case next year. And I think that I'm not going to sit here and say Chelsea can go from where they were last season to winning the Premier League title. But I do think we're under the right circumstances. I think we can at least be an assured top 4 team and, rise above where we were last year to maybe usurp some of the teams we were lagging behind before. I still think Liverpool haven't really sat around, have they? They've, I think, recruited very well. Man City have recruited very heavily. And Arsenal too. I mean, we can't really assess where Arsenal were, I think, until the end of the window, and it's the same for Chelsea. But I at least my ambition from a point of view of Chelsea fan watching the team, I think the ambition also internally is maybe not title winners, but at least putting yourself in a position where you've made a step forward. And even if you're not there till the end, it feels like a very strong or respectable, Premier League season that, puts you in a position where you're not millions and millions of miles away from the eventual champions. I'd like to be under 10 points away from who eventually is crowned champions.
Yeah, I mean, I don't even want to look back at last season's Premier League table, but from an Arsenal point of view, we'll do a more dedicated Arsenal podcast at some point in the future. But it's going to be interesting. It's going to be such an exciting Premier League season. I feel, like you say, Liverpool recruited so well. City have. I'd be interested to see what City do actually, because I think they've recruited in volume, but I'm just not entirely. Something about it, I'm not entirely convinced by them yet. I still think there are holes in that squad that need filling. They've got a lot of players that need to work together. And I think so long as you kind of keep the fundamentals of Chelsea the same, and I think you kind of got them there with the likes of Palmer, Caicedo, and you've made some good additions with Pedro, etc. I mean, you could go from being a bit of a chaotic squad to arguably one of the more settled ones quite quickly when you look at what is going on around the rest of the Premier League. But Dan, I would love to wish you well for the season. I find it very hard to do so, but you are without doubt one of the most rational and respectful Chelsea fans, and I think that's echoed in the comments we've had this evening. A lot of very nice comments and support for you. I'm not sure how many of our listeners will be eager to follow you on social media, but I would say I do tune into Dan's shows every now and then whenever I'm interested in the Chelsea insight, whether that's when we're coming up to playing them or if it's a player that they've signed that I'd like to get a bit more detail on. Dan is great at everything from just reviewing the games to doing the tactical breakdowns. So if anyone does fancy tuning in, where can they find you, mate?
Just Son of Chelsea on Twitter, Son of Chelsea YouTube. You can get the show on all podcast sort of providers as well, all that good stuff. So yeah, Son of Chelsea is the easiest way to find it.
Fantastic. Make sure, even if you are an Arsenal fan, I highly recommend going out and checking Dan's various social media channels. Son of Chelsea.
Maybe don't watch the PSG preview, because there is an Arsene Wenger dig, which I do lay in there at some point. So you may want to skip the PSG preview. You can watch probably everything else.
Okay, just hold out for the review on that one. Maybe for Arsenal fans, depending on the result, that'll be a bit more of an easier listen. But yeah, Dan, we'll be sure to get you involved more throughout the rest of the season when we come up against you in the Premier League. But from myself, from the rest of the Arsenal community that have gotten involved this season, thank you very much for coming on. Myself, Chris and Amanda will be back on Wednesday evening, so be sure to check in for that. We'll be doing a bit of a look ahead to the upcoming season, talking about some of our transfer business. But yeah, Dan, thank you for coming on, mate. From myself, thank you for tuning in, and we'll be seeing you very soon. Thank you from the Same Old Arsenal podcast. See you later. Bye-bye.